Welcome to the bookshelf. We have a special guest who came in from Cape Town for the launch of his debut book, The Age of Decay, How Aging and Shrinking Populations Could Usher in the Decline of Civilization. Shamil Ismail, thank you so much for joining us. And what a provocative title to start with. What made you write the book?
Hi, Sindy. Yeah, it is quite provocative. The background to the book was really, I was doing research in terms of consumer markets and the growth of it. And what struck me is that for the past 100 years, basically throughout the period of the modern economy, we've had growing markets, markets expanding with the growing population. But that's starting to change. We're already seeing some countries with declining populations. In fact, by 2025, we'll have 31 countries that will have declining populations.
And why should this be of concern, particularly if others may say it would be better for the environment if there are less people because of the damage that we've caused as the human race?
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the most common sort of responses, is that maybe that's great because we know the negative effects that growing consumerism and has had on global warming, etc. What's happened is that across all countries, as they develop, urbanization rates increase. And a great example is China, for example, in the space of 40 years moved from a undeveloped country to a sort of the second largest economy in the world within 4 decades. And if you track their urbanization, went from 19% in 1980 to 64% currently. So that just illustrates, in other countries it took a bit longer in terms of that trajectory, but in China it was quite pronounced. And it's really driven by the economic need. The job opportunities are in the urban areas. And that's where people basically flock to.
Yeah, but also the reason for the population decline is the policies, as you mentioned, with China, where you only have a threshold of 2 children. Otherwise, that would be in contempt of the law of the country.
Yeah, so it was 1 child. And in fact, that was a big mistake that they made. I think they realize it now in hindsight. In 1980, they implemented the 1-child policy, basically restricting families to having 1 kid only. So for 35 years, it was lifted in 2016, 35 years, they just had this society which basically just reared 1 child. And the consequences of that was sort of revealed when they did social studies subsequent to that. And they revealed a whole host of sort of social issues with that in terms of the behavior of single children. For example, they are less trusting, they don't take responsibility, they don't take risks, etc. And all those sort of things have a broader societal impact because then your entrepreneurship suffers and all those type of things.
Yeah, so socialization also goes with your siblings or your home environment. It's not that your siblings are a nuisance necessarily, but they're also there to build your character and your coping mechanisms just in life.
They keep you in check. Yep. You know? So in larger families, parents quite often are not as exhausted as are with 1 or 2 kids. You know, they need to be a lot more hands-on in this, and they've got their day jobs, etc. Whereas with a larger family, they can play together, they sort of set limits to one another, and there's sort of barriers or boundaries set by the cohort of youngsters, which is lost in a single-child family.
Yeah, and which is the worst affected country in terms of their vulnerability to a population, not only decline, but possible even worse outcomes?
Well, Italy is quite significantly impacted. Japan has been dealing with this issue for almost a decade now, more than a decade. But China is probably the one that will experience the fastest decline because of that hard policy of a 1-child family. Being in place for 35 years. So when they lifted it in 2016, they said, okay, now you can have 2 kids. And guess what happened? People still continue to have 1 kid. Then they lifted to 3 kids. It's still, the generation has become so accustomed to this structure of the family being a single child that either they have 1 child or no children at all.
Yeah, and further complications when it comes to infertility, fertility maybe with women and their childbearing age, you'd find that they may be working or there are other economic opportunities that then impacts on their decision to have a family or not.
Yeah. So another related to that urbanization story that I spoke about earlier, the other factor that's also driving down fertility rates is the increased education for women, for girls, basically. So in a rural environment, they don't really have that many opportunities. In an urban environment, they can complete schooling, and they also offered opportunity for tertiary education. And what that means is that if you have a life, a window of, let's say, 22 years from 18 to 40 to have a kid. If you now spend 4 or 5 years at university and the first 5 years in building your career, the window of of fertility reduces.
But what does that then say about women emancipation and the right of, to choose and to have a career? Is it not more patriarchy or patriarchal for us to say it's because women are educated that the population has declined?
Yeah. There's a fascinating documentary made by a Scottish filmmaker who's actually living in Japan, titled Birth Gap. And he got a lot of flack for this issue, basically saying that. But his angle was that there's a lot of women out there who plan to have kids, but then life happens. By the time that they want to have kids, they struggle with fertility, or alternatively, life circumstances changes. They may have a breakup or divorce, etc. So this Birth Gap documentary focused on that aspect of it. But the message really is this: we want to raise awareness of the fact that, look, this is a trend that we're following. We're not saying that be prescriptive in terms of you must have more kids, etc. We're just saying that the patterns are showing that we're having fewer kids, and these are the consequences of that.
And does it change in terms of your demographics and income levels, education, where we find maybe in more socially poorly resourced areas they have children? Or what does the research suggest?
Cindy, this is a fascinating thing, because if you ask young people, professional young people, why they don't have bigger families, they bring up the cost issue. Today it's very expensive, etc., schooling and all that. But when you look at the data, poor families have have more kids. Okay, so it's the issue really is that when you move up the the LSM, the income ladder, your desire for schooling and all the other things raises. So you don't just want to send them to a average school, you want to send them to the best school that you can afford. And that kind of thing. So it's, that's one of the factors.
We'll continue our discussion here with Shamil Ismail, the author of The Age of Decay, how a shrinking population impacts not only on our quality of life in future, but for future generations as well, where there may not be access to a labor force or any other life instruments and factors that we require. We're back after this.